Hello and welcome to Mandibil. And this time we are going to do something a bit more, scary and interesting than than in recent times. My deconstructions of the Stefan Molyneux, for instance. This time I've actually been on Stefan Molyneux's show, and it was kind of a scary experience, right? Even me, as I'm not going to leverage myself to highest levels of philosophical discourse or anything like that, but at least I am decently qualified to have these kinds of discussions, right? I'm open for suggestions to where I might be wrong, and I hope that the other part will extend the same courtesy, right? Now, the situation was this, and I need to give a little context before we get into the actual debate here. Or debate is actually too much to call it, in my opinion, right? I was I woke up in the middle of the night, right? And I couldn't fall asleep again. And I was sort of okay. Let me have a glass of water and sit a little and look at some if there was a message on my laptop or anything. And something had popped in, and then I needed to contact a guy, right? And for that I needed Telegram, which is sort of an app you use for communicating and also live transmissions and various stuff, right? I'm not very much into Telegram. I only use it because it's one of those channels, right? You can use. And I had it uninstalled for a while, for I didn't really use it lately, right? I thought, okay, I'll reinstall it. And then when it was reinstalled, Stefan Molyneux and his channel popped up because I had previously, some month or so or 2 months back, subbed on his channel on Telegram, right? And then that popped up when I installed Telegram, and then a live transmission window popped up also with him talking with his minions there, right? And then I was sort of curious. There was something about what he said. I said, okay, I just listened for a while to get an idea what everybody talking. Is it something interesting, or is it the same old rambling he's doing? And then he stopped. So quite a few seconds later, there was all some kind of discussion he was doing that was apparently ending. And then he sort of scoured the list of listeners in that chat. And then he started to mention my name, or my avatar name, Mandibil, right? He said, Mandibil, are you there? Or something like that. I was like, what the I was sitting there in my bed in my undies, right? And, sort of, what the hell? And I thought to myself, I sort of slightly tired, or sort of annoyed. So I said, fuck it, I'm going to, press the button and go live with him, right? And that's why I'm a little out of my, slightly out of balance, unfocused in the start, right? But I felt actually quite awake at that point, and I've worked hard the day before, and I was up very early, and so I went to bed, so to say, very early the previous day. So I had got sort of a 5 or 6 hours of sleep, right? So I was sufficiently awake to do it, right? And when he said that, called my name, I sort of okay. I pressed the button and say, as you can hear, when I start, I say something like, okay, now that you mention my name, or that you called me or mentioned me or something like that. I don't remember exactly how I put it, but we will get to that in a moment, right? That's why I'm saying, okay, now that you are calling me, let me have your definition of metaphysics, right? And then he sort of turns it around and say, no, you have to give me your definition. So it's like, okay, let's get into it, right? Let's see what he says here, right? Okay, maybe I should mention that I have downloaded the official sound file from Odysee in order to have it locally, so that while I'm doing this deconstruction video here, it won't, if the internet connection breaks or something like that, I'm not dependent on that. I can keep recording here even if my internet connection should go down, right? And I would have a break in it if I was using a direct stream from Odysee or Rumble or something like that. So I downloaded the file and I'm playing the file in VLC player. That's why it looks sort of this window here below here, right? And also it might give me a chance to have a better level of sound, because for some reason my sound sounds quite muffled, at least in the beginning, because also 10 minutes or so into the discussion, or maybe a bit more, I went from my bed where I was sitting with my laptop and to the living room in the sofa, so I could sit more, I get closer to the microphone in the laptop and so on. So I think after a few minutes, the quality of my sound in this becomes better, but it's still kind of muffled, and I find it kind of annoying because it makes it sound like I'm sort of an amateur or something like that, right? And I checked the sound setting this up here, right? I'm sitting in my office, right? My work office, and it sounds like the sound when I record it directly myself is better than through Telegram. So it might be because there's something about Telegram, I don't know. It might also because Stefan Molyneux have some settings that are not very good in his recording, or I don't know, right? I don't know. So, but because his sound comes through clearly, but that might be because he has the good sound at his place, right? So I don't know, but I think it's sufficiently clear, my voice, in order to get the point across, right? And also, I'm recording this from my laptop. I don't like these big setups with microphones and cameras and all that bullshit. I like to keep it simple. I want to be flexible and can move around and so on. So I want to do it from my laptop. And there's a cost and benefit from that, right? As there is with everything. There's always a cost and always a benefit, right? If there's a benefit, there's usually a cost, right? Okay. And sometimes there aren't that much benefit, but there's a lot of cost. So, comparatively. Okay. Those are the wise words for today. Okay, let's get into it.
Sorry, I didn't mean your definition of metaphysics. I meant of your metaphysics. I mean your definition of what you mean by metaphysics. Very happy.
I have to rewind here. Sorry.
What's up?
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. So now you're talking to me. Would you explain your metaphysics for me, please?
I would be very happy to explain my metaphysics. Let's just make sure we're both talking about the same thing. If you could give me your definition, please.
Now I could understand that if I'm asking a question, that in order for him to answer it, there would be some reasoning in saying, well, would you mind defining what you mean by metaphysics? But it's not really necessary, right? Metaphysics is not some weird word that needs a definition in order for him to understand it, right? And me using the term, calling in on a philosophy show, the greatest philosophy show on earth, and talking to the greatest philosopher of all time, apparently, right? There should be some kind of consensus of what I mean by metaphysics, right? And why wouldn't he take control of metaphysics? Good question. Now I give you my definition of what metaphysics is. Would you agree? But rather he would push it to my side and sort of invite me to talk about it, right? But then a few minutes later, he keep making sure that you can't be interrupted. I mean, he's sort of pushing the dialogue over to my side and let me elaborate, and then he should be open to listening to elaborations. But very quickly, it's sort of a trick. He wants me to talk, and then he wants to be able to say, you are doing something wrong in the way you're talking, right? If he was on the talking side from the beginning, he would be the one laying down the track or laying down the definitions. Now he can attack my definitions and my way of talking instead, and sort of in order to derail the discussion from the beginning. and stress you and make you feel uncomfortable, and people using their second language or for whatever, right? And this is sort of a sophist trick he's using, and it's not the first time. I've seen a lot of times when he have with a certain topics like metaphysics. This is sort of, when you say the word metaphysics to Stefan Molyneux, it's like throwing a red towel in the face of a bull or something like that. He's like, oh, metaphysics, I have to control, he'll probably try to make me crazy or something. So he's bending over backwards in order to find some loophole out of this discussion, while at the same time trying to make sure that the caller is looking ridiculous. Because when the caller looks ridiculous, it sort of implicitly should be understood as Stefan Molyneux must be right, of course, right? So that's the trick he's attempting, right? Once again, for God knows what number of time, right?
Well, I asked first.
And that's what I'm saying. I feel like I'm being manipulated here, right? I have to present the definitions so he can attack my definitions, rather than me asking him to present definitions in his great philosophy show, right? So that I could potentially find flaws in his. So he wants to push it over to my side so he can attack my definitions, right? And that's why I'm saying, well, I asked first, which is a fair, why? It's not a good start on a discourse to say to people who ask you a question, responding with a question in the other direction, right? Answering a question with a new question, or turning the gun the other way, so to say, to stay in that sort of militant approach that Stefan Molyneux also has. It's not, if he is so concerned about how you're supposed to debate and the art of the argument and how you should behave in that, shouldn't talk over people and, then why is he answering a question with another question, right? That's not very good discourse, right? So if I'm asking you a question, Molyneux, then you should answer the question. And then you can ask me a question in the same direction or the same question back. But it would be fair to say that you should answer the question, because you actually invited me to come in and ask questions, right? Which you didn't hear in the original video, but I'm telling you that's what happened, right? He sort of talked to the forum or the chat box in Telegram and said, Mandibil, do you have a question? Apparently I was the only one left there. I don't know. I don't know. It all went so quickly. I didn't get time to, okay, what's going on here, right? I was just, let me take him on. I was apparently in the sort of half awake, half asleep, and not thinking really, right? Sort of in the impulse of the moment. And I was sort of, I don't give a shit, right? Let me have a go at him, right? Okay. So, and it's like he's very, let me say, good at, but he's very good at trying to manipulate the discussion so it looks like the other one is an idiot or is violating some rules of how you should do this or how you should do that, right? While he's actually doing the same thing, right? He's doing exactly what he says I can do or must not do, right? Just listen carefully to the rest of the show where he keeps, at any given time he can, then he interrupts me or while I have a sort of a break where I have to think before my next word, he sort of, okay, he thinks that now it's his turn. No. But then I can't stop him because then I would be interrupting him. So he's sort of squeezing himself through the door and saying, no, I'm inside. Now you can't interrupt me, right? So it's like a destructive kind of discourse, right? There's nothing, and we'll get to the final point, sort of an hour into the discussion, that there's nothing to gain from this, right? It's a big pile of nothing, right? Where he constantly tries to take control by inserting his questions that I have to answer, right? Answer this question now. Do it now, and I can't elaborate. I can't go back to the real context we were talking about. But yes, I have to some statement he makes, and is this the case, or something like that? And if I'm not answering his question, he's like, okay, but then we can talk together, or something like that, right? So it's sort of a militant, authoritarian, patronizing way of discussing with people. Now, I find myself to be a decently good at discussing philosophy, right? And even when I try my best to say, okay, this is my argument and so on, he keeps going in other directions, right? He keeps going. It's kind of ridiculous that his fans apparently is not able to see what the hell he's doing, right? And so you could say that the conclusion is they don't give a shit about philosophy, right? They care about some kind of mission he's on to save the world or whatever. And philosophy is just that blue stamping thing he's using in his sort of sophist world there to sort of, as I said, blue stamping whatever goal he has, right? Whatever dots he wants to connect to get to the final goal, sort of confirmation bias type of philosophy. Now I'm getting a little ahead of the show, but maybe we should get back into it, right? And there's a big, as I said, he tries to sort of get me unbalanced in the discourse by sort of dominating things left and right? In the start, he kept asking questions, and then he makes sure that when I'm trying to elaborate, that he can sort of destroy my ability. It's like saying to people, please tell me something, and then when they start to tell you something, you do everything that you can to destroy their enthusiasm about telling you something, right? So it's like, yes, please do this, and I'm going to destroy your ability to do it, right? To throw you off and maybe make you mad so you can attack the madness, or not the madness. If people get angry, then he can talk to say, you shouldn't get angry, I can talk to you. Some kind of technique like that, right? It's just sophistry. It is pure, unadulterated sophistry he's doing, right? He is not interested in doing philosophy of any serious kind, right?
Sorry, I didn't mean your definition of metaphysics. I meant your metaphysics. I meant your definition of what you mean by metaphysics, just to make sure that I'm going to answer the right question for you.
Well, okay, let's put it this way then. All the philosophy you need to do in order to start on epistemology.
Well, I think you need to start with metaphysics, but...
See, he didn't even listen to what I said. I said, the philosophy you need to do to get to epistemology. Now, it might be a very short way of defining it, but metaphysics is a kind of philosophy. It's the philosophy of a certain kind, and I define it as that philosophy you do before you start on epistemology. I might have said it something or slightly clearer, right? And that's why he's completely misunderstanding. He thinks I'm talking about epistemology, right? So I'm just saying that, okay, there's metaphysics in the structure of, if you have to go all the way from the beginning to the end of philosophy, there's epistemology, there's metaphysics, then there's epistemology, and then there's, in my opinion, objectivity, and then there's ethics, and then maybe applied ethics, which would be something like morality, right? In this structure, you need to do the first thing before you do the second thing, and you need to do the second thing before you do the third thing. And that's why I'm saying I'm not defining what metaphysics is, but I'm saying it's a kind of philosophy, and all that philosophy that comes before you start to deal with epistemology. That's a way to say it. I'm sort of open for any kind of philosophy that isn't epistemology or anything even further down the road, like ethics or something like that, right? And this is also a very good thing for you, as a listener to my show, that you keep focusing on whether or not people are staying in the category we are dealing with, right? Which is also something that he jumps out of and starts to talk about knowledge. You can't talk about knowledge in metaphysics because you need to settle metaphysics before you do knowledge, right? Or try to get to a definition of knowledge, which would be the philosophy called epistemology. But to do epistemology, you need to have settled all of your metaphysics to the best of your abilities, right? And that's something you should look out for if you are talking metaphysics. When people start to talk about how do you know, I might do the same kind of flaw, right? And I would correct myself if sometimes it's about the choice of words, but if you start to talk about how do you define what you know and what does it mean that it's true or anything like that, then the philosopher is using or referring to specific kinds of philosophy that has nothing to do in metaphysics, because you need the metaphysics in order to talk about those things, right? And he wants me to define metaphysics, my metaphysics, and then he wants to apparently me to define metaphysics in all generality, right? And why would he do that if he weren't going to attack it, right?
Again, just tell me what your definition of metaphysics is.
Hang on. I say metaphysics I define as that amount of philosophy you need to do in order to start on epistemology.
Okay. All right, so yeah, just give me your definition of metaphysics.
It was like, okay. So he wasn't really interested in my answer. He sort of, now let me get to the next question. He's not, listen carefully to what he's doing. He's trying to find some way for me to fall into a trap or formulate it in a way he can attack. He's not really he got an answer from me that he can't use to attack me with, right? So, okay, what's the next thing I can ask about, right?
And not what metaphysics, like your whole argument for metaphysics, but for me, metaphysics is the...
So he's asking a question where he's sort of, sneaking his definition into the question, right? So he's asking me a question that at the same time encompasses his definition, right? So his definition of metaphysics is cloaked as a question to me. It's like, what is he doing, right? This is not philosophy. This is not a discourse. This is trying to tilt the other dude, the other people in the discussion, right? And he's trying to get you uncomfortable with this, right? He's trying to find some loophole where he can get you to say something that sounds crazy, so he can attack that instead, right? It's like poking at the bear or poking at the tiger and saying, you attacked me, or you get angry or something like that. And then you can attack that instead, right? It's sort of a what's it called? Try to provoke a straw man or something like that, right?
The study of reality independent of human consciousness.
Well, that's the most stupid definition of metaphysics you could possibly have, right? Because reality is that which you have to establish in metaphysics. You can't study it in order to establish it, right? You have to establish it first before you study it. And studying reality or whatever it is, right, entails that you understand what it means to study, and you have to know what it means to have reality, right? That's what you do in metaphysics. I wouldn't even say study. Study is not, in any case, a part of metaphysics. That would be maybe after you have done epistemology and maybe even ethics. That's scientific or something like that, right? So study is the worst, just about the worst term you can use in metaphysics, right? It just goes to show that he has no clue what he's talking about. But he's sitting in sort of a philosophical echo chamber where everybody coming in or are allowed in is saying, oh, you're so great. Everything you say is perfect. And if there's any sort of real philosophical discord, they are kicked out of his system, right? So can only hear himself talk, right?
No, because metaphysics has to define what reality is. What you mean by one of the things you might need to do in metaphysics is define what reality is.
Oh, so for you,
what you mean
hang on. Dude, if I'm talking, we can't both talk over each other, okay? We got to...
Okay, so now he couldn't get a fork under me. He couldn't get, the spade under me to sort of... insecure my foundations of philosophy. He clearly understands now that I'm not a stupid asshole, right? That he can twist around. So now he had to do something else to make me look stupid, right? So you have to attack the way I say things, or if I say something while he says something, then I'm bad, or something like that. Let's listen.
Try and play this back and forth. So for you, or at least for the purpose of this conversation, metaphysics is the study of reality, but reality includes the human mind.
He didn't say, this is my definition, right? He asked me to talk about my definition. But when he says, metaphysics is this, he doesn't frame it as his definition, right? So now he is sort of pressing a sort of universal, whatever, God-given definition of metaphysics down on me, right? It's sort of a provocation to say, well, you're wrong. This is the definition, right? If he's not saying this is my definition, it must be some kind of universal definition that there's some kind of census about that he has to force into me, right? And he's still using that study of reality. What kind of bullshit is that?
So for me, I'm still talking. No, hang on. Listen, dude, no, hang on.
And that's why I'm reacting. I'm reacting to his sophistry, right? I'm reacting that now he's trying to enforce a definition of metaphysics that I haven't agreed to, right? You can't just say, this is the definition. He's asking me to give my definition, and then he gives an attempt at an objective, apparently, definition. This is the definition. He's not saying, okay, my definition is, he did say that first, but now he has changed it to, this is the definition, right? And that's why I'm reacting. And that's what he wanted. He wanted me to react and sort of do it in a wrong way, so that then he could attack my way of saying it rather than letting me elaborate on, right? So it's all about domination and controlling. This has nothing to do with any interest in getting to any insights of any kind, right? You need to understand this. And, I'm taking one for the team here, right? It's like I'm risking my he has a very small following at this point, I think, right? So I'm not being smeared all over YouTube and attacked left and right by commenters. So I'm sort of decently safe, right? But this is all it's about. It's about him controlling a narrative and making sure that his minions doesn't run away. He needs his flying monkeys to, posture his lack of... He's, in my opinion, he's a very weak personality, right? He doesn't have the cojones. He doesn't have the backbone, right? He has an idea of where his philosophy should lead him. He is sort of a confirmation bias type of... They have to lead to the orange man, or it has to lead to libertarian, or it has to lead to anarchy. It has to lead to this and that, right? Because that's the definition. That's his understanding, preconceived understanding of how things are. So he's just form-fitting the philosophy in order to get to the point he wants to, and he can't see anything else because he's afraid he's going to go crazy, right? And he has said that several times in other interviews or in his own shows, his own, monologues, right? Where he said, I'm afraid of going crazy by these people who say that I can't trust my senses, or whatever, something like that, right? And we'll get further into this as we go along, right? So maybe I should stop talking and keep going before this becomes a 10-hour video.
Hang on, wait, hang on. No, I'm not going to stop talking. I'm not going to stop talking.
If he needs to yell like that, right? That's a strong sign that he wants to dominate. He needs to dominate people in order to feel good, right? It's like he uses people who actually want a philosophical discourse of some kind, right? From some angle, and shit all over them in order to feel good about himself, right? Because he doesn't have the sufficient argument in order to convince people, right? He only have, you're an idiot, and I'm going to do something and I'll talk over you, or I'm shut you off and I'm talking to myself for 20 minutes, convincing my minions that I'm right. That's the only tool he has. And it's pathetic, right? It is really pathetic for somebody who believes he's possibly the greatest philosopher of all time, and people are going to make statues of him in 500 years or whatever, right? Let me tell you, if they're making statues of you in 500 years, it is not for the reasons you think, right? Let me just be clear about that.
Until you stop talking over me. Okay, if you want to have this conversation, you have to at least have the self-control to not talk over me when I'm in the middle of making a point. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, but you're framing it incorrectly.
No. I have.
Then he broke over my. He asked, "Can we agree on that?" Then I start to talk, and then he breaks my. He interrupts me, right? He's doing exactly what he tells me I can't do, right? What kind of person is that? What kind of person is that? He's not curious about anything. He needs to control this debate because he knows it's a topic he can't handle. He can handle this topic without dominating, right? That says a lot about his abilities as a philosopher. He told me not to interrupt, and he interrupted me to tell me I can't interrupt. I mean, I actually, as I stated in the Discord server, discussing with the dudes over there, right? I actually feel sorry for his wife and his kid, right? That they have to live with an asshole like this. What a fucking asshole, right? This is sort of it's the closest thing you can get to saying to people that you're an asshole without saying it explicitly, right? He's basically implicitly saying, I'm an asshole, I'm going to, throw shit at you until you do as I say, or I'll kick you out, or something like that.
To have that agreement from you, if you want to have the conversation with me, you can't use an excuse like something I'm framing, whatever that means. If I'm in the middle of making a point, you can't talk over me. I won't talk over you as best I can, unless I genuinely don't understand something. But if you're in the middle of making a point, I won't talk over you.
I'm saying here.
No. See, now you're doing it again.
So when I try to say something, I'm always interrupting, and he just did the same thing. So in order for this to work, this rule then there has to be some kind of understanding. Okay, at what point can I start to say something after I think that you have stopped saying? Maybe it's just so a break to catch my breath or something, or think these complex matters that I need 4 or 5 seconds to find a word to express. And then he says, okay, I'm jumping in. And I'm saying, no, stop jumping in. And then he says, no, you can't talk over me. So he's basically doing the opposite. It's a destructive behavior to throw the other part off, right? So I can't get to explain what I'm saying, because then he's muffled me by keep saying I can't interrupt. Why, he just interrupted me to say that I can't interrupt him or something like that, right? It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. He's on another planet, right?
Again, I'm still not finished my point. So we can't have the conversation if... No, I need the agreement from you that that's how it's going to go.
Okay, fine. It's your show.
No, don't be passive-aggressive with me. No, don't.
I'm passive-aggressive, man. I'm just saying, okay, it's your show. You are the one running this show, so it's more likely, or more reasonable that you might set the tone of the show. If you were on my show, Stefan Molyneux, it would be fair to say that if you said, okay, it's your show, then fine, you get to decide how the rules are, right? Okay, fine. It's your show. Well, it is your show, isn't it? I mean, I'm a caller, a listener, whatever you want to call it. On your show, it's your show, right? You set, just like if you're working in my company, there's certain rules that I've created in my company that we follow. And if I point out to my employee that they're not following the rules, and if they say, okay, fine, it's your company, say, okay, fine, yeah, it is my company, right? Oh, no, then he sort of interprets it as passive-aggressiveness, and then he can sort of, you are bad, and it's just, oh my God, man. I was so, tired. I was not tired, but I was not 100% myself. I was like, I don't give a care. I don't give a fuck, right? I'm not going to be, annoyed by this, right? That's not going to end my days. But it's like he is he is manifesting his power by, forcing me to adhere to his rules, right? It's like, oh, I got you down, right? It's sort of the patronizing, pushing you down and say you're not worthy of this, whatever, right? It's obvious, man, right? And also, another point he's getting across between the lines is people who are listening to this, who might think I would like to have a discussion with him, might think twice about it, right? Because you never know where this is going to go. What kind of trick he's going to pull on you, right? So you're people who are sort of maybe have ability to do some kind of rigid and structured discourse on philosophy might have second thoughts and say, no, I won't risk being, ridiculed or dominated or lectured and patronized live on the show like this, and he's just recording it and throwing it out to everybody else without asking me or something like that, right? I can't control the edit he's making here, right? I control now whether it's editing it. And if there's something I said I would like to retract anything, I don't get any chance to do that and so on, right? So it's a way to make sure that it's only the masochistic audience that stays left who does what he says. Everybody who can think for themselves and actually participate in a philosophical discourse will sort of say, no, I'm not going to do it because Stefan Molyneux, he's an asshole, right? So it might look that he's sort of the best philosopher in the world to these blind people who wants this one-eyed king, right?
Be passive aggressive with me. It's my show. That's civilized human behavior. It's civilized behavior for you not to talk over me when I'm talking. It's not just, oh, it's my show, right? I mean, it's civilized, decent behavior to let somebody else, you're still doing it. It's civilized behavior to let somebody else finish making their point before you bully them and talk over them, right?
I'm not bullying anybody. Okay, I have to stop myself now and say, please carry on.
No, I still need an agreement from you that you're going to do it, and not because it's my show or something, but because you can't have a debate with somebody if you're talking over them, right?
That's what I'm trying to say. So carry on.
I don't
please.
understand.
I'm in agreement with you. I'm saying, fine, we have that agreement. I'm not going to interrupt you, and you're not going to interrupt me then.
Fantastic. Okay. All right.
Great.
So for me, I'm sorry?
Great.
I don't think that just happened. Okay. So you need to not interrupt me.
I just said, okay, great, we are in agreement. So he says, okay, then we are in agreement. And I say, okay, great. And then he said, oh, were you interrupting me there? Were you interrupting? Oh, no, I think I didn't hear that. Sort of that's passive aggressive, right? I mean, no, that's my interpretation, right? But it's like, oh man, if you make any sound of any kind while he is in his monologue, you're like, you said something. I was talking, right? Well, I might remind you that I was doing some work yesterday. I was re-listening to because I was inspired by this rule he has here, right? That I don't think he followed that same rule when he was talking to Rationality Rules in that show a couple of years ago, discussing UPB. And I re-listened to that show, right? And he basically keeps interrupting Rationality Rules time and time again, right? And even if he says, excuse me for interrupting, but he's still interrupting even if he says, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. It's like, okay, so if you say sorry, then you can interrupt the what? Are you just making up rules on the fly as you see fit? Or what is like, or are you really following your own rules? Because it seems to me you're a master of breaking in and interrupting people in their train of thought, right? Let's see how he handles these rules as we get further into it.
Right after you say you're not going to interrupt me. Okay. So for me, and I think this is a pretty good way of doing it, and I have a whole playlist. You can find it at fdrpodcast.com.
So why did we need to do this exercise? For me, the whatever metaphysics is, why didn't he just start by saying, for me it is? When I asked, what's your metaphysics? Well, he could say, for me, it is this, and go listen to my whatever, which I have listened to many years ago, and I don't care about it because it's not very good, in my opinion. But why didn't he just start out by saying that? No. He wanted me to get in the field so he could attack me and, frame me so everybody knows I'm a stupid idiot. And now he's got, by the, his great heart, and he's going to listen to me anyway, even if I'm a stupid idiot who doesn't know anything or how to behave or anything. So I'm sort of put in the trench warfare over there so he can sit here and be the big Jesus of philosophy, right?
I talk about an introduction to philosophy. It's a 17-part series where I go all the way from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics.
And there he actually points out my point, right? He metaphysics, epistemology, and so on. Yeah, that's how I defined it. And he has basically, by making this show or this series of introduction to philosophy 15 years ago, he's actually made the same kind of implicit definition of epistemology. That's the philosophy that you have to do before you do epistemology. So why is he so confused about my definition, right?
To politics and so on. So, for me, metaphysics is a study of reality that does not include human consciousness, because once we start to include human consciousness and its relationship to reality, we're in the...
So how do you study something that is not a part of your consciousness? Right? So, now we are going into discussing his definition, right? But I might be, if you haven't catched that problem yet, you should be, I'm not going to tell you what you should be, but it's very likely that you can sense there's some problem in what he's saying, right? You might, I've got no, maybe I can wind it.
What's up?
Hey, man.
What's up?
Of comparative reality. For me, right after you say you're not going to interrupt me.
Let's take it from here.
So for me, and I think this is a pretty good way of doing it, and I
think it's a pretty, so because he thinks it's a pretty good way of doing it. It's a good definition. Oh yeah, his personal subjective opinion about this objective definition of, you see a problem there? Right? It's ridiculous. Oh yeah, I think it's pretty good definition. So it must be good, right? Because me, philosophy Jesus, think it's good. Yeah?
Whole playlist, you can find it at fdrpodcast.com, where I talk about an introduction to philosophy. It's a 17-part series where I go all the way from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics to politics and so on. So, for me, metaphysics is a study of reality that does not include human consciousness, because
the study of reality that doesn't include human consciousness. Well, don't you have to be conscious of what you're doing when you're making that study? And the term study, I really don't like, as I pointed out before, right? Studying is when you're studying butterflies or, whatever, flowers or stamps or coins or, whatever you can study, right? The history of whatever, right? Or fossils, or that's a study. But then entails that you have done metaphysics and epistemology in order to understand what you mean by an object and so on, and even objectivity maybe even, right? If you're working with other people, you have to have some kind of objectivity, right? So it's like, his definition is freaking stupid, right? It's the most clear statement to me that he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's saying, right? It might make sense in his head, but what he expresses is completely madness. It has nothing to do with metaphysics, right? And he thinks it's a good definition. Well, it just goes to show how bad it is at philosophy, right? No, what his stick is, if he can convince people that he's good at philosophy, it doesn't really matter if he's good at philosophy. If people believe he's good at philosophy, then he must be good at philosophy, right? So that there's sufficient amount of people who want some kind of philosophical blue stamping of whatever philosophy, as long as it's useful for their purpose, right?
Once we start to include human consciousness and its relationship to reality, we're in the realm of epistemology. So metaphysics is the study of what is, and then when the products of human consciousness are compared...
No, it's not a study of what is, right? What is existing is when you have to understand the foundations you're using in order to classify what it means to know. You can't just you need to make definitions and axioms and all sorts of stuff in metaphysics in order to have something to reference back to a reduction base of some kind. When you're saying, I know that, okay, how do you know that? Yeah, because this, and then you're going into definitions and words and so on, and they all have to lead straight back in a very coherent manner back to a reduction base that says, this is the ground floor. You can't get any further because you don't have access to anything further down the line, right? That's where this line stops. The rest is not accessible to you, something like that. And you have to be able to trace those claims of knowledge back to that reduction base. That reduction base is at the foundations of metaphysics. And when you make the reduction base, the next step you take in order to eventually get to epistemology have to be a coherent set of arguments and statements and definitions and axioms and whatever you need in order to start to do epistemology, right? And that chain of reasoning needs to be able to follow that all the way down to the reduction base, a reduction base that anybody in the world can follow without you having to tell them what it is, right? Otherwise, you will need to be some kind of authority on philosophy and experiences that people have to call all the time in order to understand what they're doing, right? That wouldn't work because people have to function on their own accord. So the reduction base has to be something that everybody can follow at all times in their everyday. And that's why I'm a very big proponent of the qualia or the sense experiences to be the foundation of your metaphysics. Because that's what I think that everybody can have. Because they all have eyes and they all have ears and all have mouth with a tongue that I suspect that can have a taste and the body that can feel stuff and so on, right? So they can go out and have those experiences and qualia by their own accord. And that's how they can check whether or not I'm talking about knowledge. And we are talking about knowledge and potential objectivity. If we can follow that line back in arguments, back to that reduction base that we agreed upon, right? That's the kind of thinking and philosophy you need to do, not telling people you shouldn't interrupt me and this is my definition and I think it's great. And so that's not how you do it, right?
To reality. In other words, if you say that's a tree while pointing at a tree, then you're making a knowledge claim, and therefore we're in the realm of epistemology. So first we study the nature of what is, and then we study the relationship between consciousness and what is, in particular truth claim statements, which is epistemology, and from there we go to ethics. Does that somewhat accord with your way of thinking, or do you want to redefine it or define it differently?
Well, it doesn't accord. I don't like the use of the term study. Study is something you do when you have epistemology. You can't study something without having an idea of knowledge. And you need to do some metaphysics in order to settle what is knowledge. That's what I said that in order to frame the area of the philosophy of epistemology, you have to, one way to say it is that that's the philosophy you need to do before you can actually settle on knowledge. You can't study anything without having an idea of knowledge. So maybe you're just using different words. I would say it's a kind of philosophy. It's not a study. You could study, flowers or tractors or birds or whatever, stamps and so on. But that needs, entails an understanding of what knowledge is, right? Because you are studying that which you call reality. When you are claiming study, then you're studying something that is a part of reality, but reality has to be defined and argued for in that which you call metaphysics, right? So that it's not an area that is sort of defined before you can talk about it. You need to start to philosophize in order to figure out actually what entails metaphysics, because it's not a given.
Well, of course, I completely understand that. So when I say that metaphysics is a study of reality independent of human consciousness, I am a human consciousness making that distinction. So without a doubt.
Okay, how can you make that distinction? Because you're using your consciousness in order to refer to something that is not in your consciousness, and that is what you're studying. You're using consciousness to tell me you're studying something that is not a part of your consciousness. How the hell does that work? I know. Does it sound crazy to you? I mean, right? And he's actually pointing out the core paradox in his thinking that I'm trying to get to, right? You could say maybe I'm sort of I'm keeping my cards close to my body and springing the sort of the trap way into it when they're saying you are working from a paradox, which is actually a way to get in. If I started about saying you are working, there's a paradox in your metaphysics, he would, run away immediately, right? Now I've sort of got him into the discourse, and I might spring this paradox on him. He basically says to you here he's working from a paradox. He says he's consciousness of something that is outside his consciousness, right? I mean, it's like, it's crazy on the next level, right?
I have to exercise some faculty of knowledge in order to make that claim. But I think we can both agree that there is, or at least I hope we can, that there's an objective reality that exists independent of human consciousness. In other words,
we can agree on that. Wow, how can we agree on that? It's not something you agree on. You have to present your philosophy that makes you able to say, well, that's what I call reality. And then I can agree or disagree on that philosophy, right? It's the philosophy we need. We can't just say, I believe in this. Do you agree? Yes or no? But that's not, that's religion, right? That's sort of a pragmatic sort of religion or something, right? That's not philosophy. Philosophy is the connected series of statements, to reference Monty Python, that leads you to draw that conclusion, or where you state this is an axiom I'm working from, or something like that. It's not philosophy. It's not, I believe in this. Do you agree? Which is basically what he's saying, right?
All of the aspects of natural reality that would continue to exist were human consciousness to disappear tomorrow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we could agree about it, but it's not good. We could agree, but I would not like it to be very good philosophy. Because if it's independent of your consciousness, how the hell do you have access to it? Pardon my French.
How do you have access to natural reality independent of our consciousness?
Yeah, how, if it's independent of your mind, or your consciousness is a part of your mind, or however you want to put it, right? So if it's not, if it's independent of your mind, you can't experience it.
It's like, no, but sorry to interrupt, but sorry, go ahead.
So he just interrupted, right? And then he sort of catches himself, okay, I better not interrupt here, because otherwise I'm shooting myself in the foot, right? So I better show some virtues. Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. But he wanted to interrupt, right? He had the urge to interrupt because he felt that he has to do something. And then he sort of catches himself, right?
It's outside my house. I can't say it's inside my house, right?
Well, but you do understand that we are using the medium of objective reality in order to have this conversation. You have
the medium. What's that medium? How do you have access? Do you have a sense? Well, there are colors, there are sounds, there are tastes, and there are feels, and there are smells, right? So this, what's the term? The medium of objectivity, objective medium. How does that arrive, right? Is it a color? Is it a sound, right? So he's just saying, yeah, there's the sense data, which is what I'm used to be, and that's what creates my awareness or my consciousness or whatever, right? And then he said, okay, and then I'm talking about objective medium. How do you get to all of a sudden talk about that? It's bad philosophy, right? It's bad metaphysics. You're not just, I'm bringing this in, and I'm bringing that in, and the third thing in, and I've solved it, right? No, you have to make connected arguments that illuminates to people, and even to yourself first, right? Why you can get to talk about it, and how that relates back to the reduction base, which is the sense data, or the sense qualia, right? You can't just disconnect yourself. Okay, I've settled it. We are working from senses, and now I'm bringing something in, right? Objective medium. What the hell is that, right? It has to be connected to the senses, right? Oh my God, a bad philosopher.
To accept that I objectively exist. You have to accept that there are sound waves. You have to accept that there's a methodology for transmitting.
I don't have to accept a sound wave. I can experience sound waves, right? So he's violating the understanding of the hard problem of consciousness, which he's not even aware of. I actually mentioned it later, and it sounds, or the lack of sound from him, encouraged me to think that he doesn't even know there's an inherent problem in his metaphysics, which leads to that which is known as the hard problem of consciousness. He doesn't even realize that because he hasn't done any research on, because he thinks, no, every academic philosopher is out to get him, so I don't need to read it. I have to make my own thinking, and it's perfect because I made it, right?
Those sound waves, in this case, TCP/IP or internet connections and so on. So you have to accept, in order to have this conversation, things that exist outside of your consciousness. And
why do I have to accept? I don't have to accept anything. That's not how you do it. That's not what you when you do philosophy, you are thinking about your own thinking, right? And when you're thinking about something, you are not thinking that, okay, I have to accept this. Or if you do that as philosophy, you're not doing it very well, right? Because what makes you say that I have to accept this other than you have some kind of confirmation bias, right? What incentive might that be other than I have an idea of where this philosophy should lead me, so I have to accept this to be the case, right? He's saying that he's basically accepted that this is the case. And why did he accept that? Well, because he needs to go in a certain direction in order to get to some conclusions that he needs to be the case in order for everything to work in his weird life, right? So he's basically saying he's not a philosopher. He's somebody who's connecting the dots the way he sees them to be connected, right? And then he extends that to me to say, you have to accept this, right? No, there's nothing I have to accept, because basically I'm talking to my experiences, right? I'm working from the axiom that that kind of experience that calls itself Stefan Molyneux, it might actually be, a being that, or a representation of some kind of being that has similarities to myself outside my experience. But my access to it is I have the experience of it, not the thing itself, because I can't be both outside and inside my mind at the same time. Otherwise, I would be the whole universe, and I would actually be in a solipsist kind of situation, right?
Exist independent of your consciousness. In other words, I don't think that you think that you're arguing with yourself, but that I'm an independent mind.
You could say that I'm arguing with my experiences, but I'm working from an axiom. I have decided that my experiences, some of them, are a representation of something outside which I do not have access to, because I can't, as I explained to him later, and I've explained this metaphysics several times previously in all sorts of situations and deconstructions of metaphysics, not least by Stefan Molyneux, but also Bernardo Kastrup and Keith Frankish and so on, right?
It's on the other side of the computer screen that is having a conversation with you.
All access I have to you as whatever I call it is an experience. I have an experience of sounds and colors and so on, the qualia of the experience. That's what I have access to. I interpret it as Stefan Molyneux or a podcast or whatever, but it's still a set of qualia. And the qualia is in my mind, but my interpretation of it is also in my mind. But I'm just saying it's outside my mind because that's the interpretation I am doing. What?
Okay, but do you accept that there are sequalia which exist as information or data? There's things that exist within your mind that do not exist outside your mind, and there are things that exist outside of your mind that do not exist in your mind. And the way that we test for that is universality, is consistency, is conformity to predictable and stable laws of physics, and so on. So every night we go to sleep.
So he says it's outside my mind, and I can test it by using these measurements, like stability or whatever he said, right? But how can he measure or check something that is outside his mind, right? If anything, all he can have is some kind of representation of that which is outside, and that representation is inside his mind, and that's what he's referring to. But if he says that is outside his mind, he has to accept that what he's working with is merely the representation of that which is outside. There might be some kind of one-to-one connection to something unknown outside, that whenever that occurs outside, you have a particular unique experience inside, but you can't get to that. You can never know if there's a one-to-one because you don't know the other end of it, right? So it doesn't make sense. You could maybe fabulate about it, but you might risk falling into convincing yourself that you actually know what it is outside, because whenever you experience an elephant, you're saying there must be elephant out there. An elephant that is sort of the icon on your desktop representing something going on deeper inside, which you do not have access to, right? So this is the paradox I'm trying to get him to identify. And I won't have success because he's simply in another frame of mind. He's in another paradigm where he rejects any kind of thinking contrary to his thinking, even if I can point to the contradiction. Even when I slap the contradiction or the paradox in his face, he's not able to identify it. He's not able to identify the contradiction. It's like, I don't care if there's, it's almost like he says to himself, I don't care if there's a contradiction. It must be this way. It's the only way. It's the only solution. There are no other explanations, right? So I don't care. It's like he's saying, I don't care if there's a contradiction, right? Okay.
And we have dreams where we're flying elephants, where we can dance in fire.
Now, I don't give a flying fuck about dreams, right? I don't care about fucking dreams when I'm doing philosophy. When I'm sleeping and weird things are going on, I don't care about them. Because they are not a part of philosophy, right? I can't philosophize while I'm dreaming. I can only philosophize about dreamings when I'm awake. And when I'm awake, I'm no longer dreaming. So you can combine philosophy and dreaming, in my opinion, right? That's why I don't give a shit about dreams. And I don't know why he's so hung up on these fucking dreams when he talks about metaphysics. He should avoid talking about dreams when you're doing metaphysics, right? Because that reality he needs to establish and argue for how to approach it in metaphysics is what he does when he does that kind of thinking when he's awake, not when he's asleep, right? I would expect. I can you be sure, right? But it's like, so why are you talking about dreams? Stop talking about dreams, right? Talking about dreams is the same as making an argument because I was hungry. I had this feeling inside me, and therefore I'm talking about metaphysics. It's sort of on the same level. It's the same kind of bad argument, right? So I'm just dumbfounded that he can't see this.
And not get burned and so on. And that's a subjective experience. And we know that that's a subjective experience because it's completely contradictory. And it's impossible for us to achieve that because we can't dance with fire. We can't be elephants that fly because that does not conform with external laws of biology and physics. And also because it happens consistently when we're asleep and doesn't happen ever when we're awake. And so because we lie down in bed and then we have these fantastical visions while we're sleeping, and of course, if you're married, your wife can confirm that you did not turn into a flying elephant and the bed was not in flames and you were dancing on it, or if you want.
Oh, she can confirm. So she is the pinnacle of objectivity and truth and all that. That's waifu, right? So if you ask somebody what happened back then where I wasn't aware, and then you just have to sort of, well, then it must be true because that person says so, right? So now you have to rely on reporting as being a part of metaphysics, right? That's just about the most weak kind of philosophy you can possibly do. So you have to rely on somebody else having done metaphysics and epistemology and so on, and even ethics, right? in order to get to your metaphysics. He's such a bad philosopher, right? He has no fucking, clue what he's doing. He hasn't thought this through, right? It's like he has some epiphany sometimes 15, 20 years ago, and now he said, I found the Holy Grail. I can go out to the world and tell them how things work, right? Without doing the sufficient thinking and trying to pinpoint or point out potential contradictions in what he's saying and shortcomings and so on. It's full of shit, this philosophy, right? There's nothing in it that hangs together, basically, right? It's just throwing words at you.
You can, if you live alone, you can video yourself all night, and you have the subjective experience of these wondrous things in nightly dreams, but they aren't
So you couldn't do metaphysics before there were video cameras, right? So what the hell was Aristotle talking about? He should have said, well, I can't do metaphysics because the video camera is not invented yet, right? Do you know how stupid that is, right? You can't use a video camera because that's another object that you are experiencing with your crania, right? So it's not like, okay, I can't say anything metaphysical or judge this because I don't have this thing over here. But when I move this thing over here in front of it, then metaphysics is explained, right? It's ridiculously stupid, right?
Actually happening in the objective world that other people are perceiving, and we know that difference because we can get the feedback from others, and we can also achieve impossible contradictory things in our dreams, which means that they're occurring within our minds, not in the objective world, if that makes sense.
I understand where you're coming from, but it doesn't make sense. Because, to say it bluntly, you are working from a paradox. You don't identify a built-in paradox in your thinking.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Your microphone is not particularly.
Oh, so I didn't catch it. Oh, there was a little break in what I was saying. Oh, I didn't catch it. You have to repeat it. Okay, so throwing me off again, trying to throw me off, right? So he understands that I can actually argue philosophically, right? He doesn't like that. No. No. He doesn't like to have anybody on that can actually. He needs to have some kind of stupid idiot that he can sort of lecture from left to right about his weird thinking and make him think to himself that he's great, right? He doesn't want any kind of good quality philosophical discourse that might actually lead to the conclusions that he might have made an error somewhere, right? Then he has to go back and edit all his books and all his podcasts and so on. We can't have that, right?
Good. I didn't identify. Okay. What am I thinking?
There's a paradox built into your thinking that you're not identifying. And that is when you're saying there's an objective outside world, you are saying it, at least, as if that is a given to you. But how do you have access to that if you need an experience of it, right? This is what you call radical skepticism or something like that, right? But there's nothing that is given to you. You need to have an experience of it, right? And that's what you have access to. And then you identify it. It's like pulling the territory out of the map and saying, now you have to put it back into the map. But you never had anything but the map. You don't have the actual territory, right?
Oh, yeah. So this is just it's Cartesian radical skepticism. We're in a matrix.
And this is this is one of those those crazy people. Yeah. Listen, people, this is one of those crazy. It's like I have said it so many times. This argument is so. This is sort of the approach now, right?
Tricks, everything could be manipulated. I get all of that, and this is like.
I didn't say that. He's framing it completely wrong, right? I am pointing to a contradiction or a paradox or whatever you want to call it, right? I'm not even sure what the term would be. I'm calling it a paradox, right? That it's like, maybe it's a contradiction actually. I'm not sure, right? But, if you say you have something is outside your mind, but at the same time you need an experience in order to have anything to go with, then how the hell do you know that it's outside your mind? What you're referring to can't be outside your mind. The only thing you can refer to is something that is inside your mind because it has to be there in order for you to experience it. You can't experience something outside your mind. It's impossible, right? It's a stupid kind of establishing something that is impossible and working from that. And if you have this kind of contradiction at the foundational, deepest level of your metaphysics, it's as good as certain that whatever follows down the line is going to be completely screwed, right? And now he's not talking about my representation. Now he's started to talk about a history of the argument or something. I might have done a stupid thing like referring to radical skepticism, but that was just to say it's along those lines, so he had something to compare it to. And now he's going on tirades of how stupid these kind of thinkings are, right?
This is undergraduate philosophy 101. Okay.
Oh, undergraduate, yes. Yeah, this is sort of amateur philosophy. Why are we even doing this, right? It's so low-level philosophy. You don't even need to do this. Right? Oh, man. Sort of arrogant attitude now, right?
So the difference is that in some of the sense data that I get, there is consistency that is independent of my will, right? So if I'm writing a story, I can say, like if you think of the movie Star Wars, right? So in the story, George Lucas, I think, was the writer, then Luke Skywalker can gesture at an object and have that object come to his hand, right? So that can be imagined and that can be recreated using various kinds of fairly cheesy special effects and all of that. So in a story, you can have things that can't occur in the natural world occur in the objective world, right?
But if you're making up a fucking story in your mind, that's not metaphysics, right? It's like, what what level is he on? It's like a big, pile of things that pounds left and right in his mind or something like that. It's unstructured, right? He's not working from a structure. He has these mantras, something like that he sort of, this mantra has to function, and if you challenge it, there's something wrong with you. You're trying to pull me up, you're trying to make me crazy. Something like that, right? Is this sort of he's dragging out this argument time again, and if you try to argue against it, it's like, okay, I'm labeling you as crazy, go away, right? So, see, he can never get to a philosophical discourse with this kind of approach. Never. And I tell you, and I say that directly to Stefan Molyneux, if you want to be remembered in 500 years, right? For something good, I think, right? But you won't be, right? I mean, you need to identify this paradox or contradiction, right? This flaw in you need to identify it and handle it and adjust your philosophy to it in order to be remembered for being on the right track of philosophy, right? In 500 years, otherwise you will be remembered for the opposite, which is one of those idiots who weren't able to understand this paradox even when somebody thrown it in his face several times trying to argue it, right? You are not going to be remembered for anything in 500 years or 100, 200, whatever years, for anything constructive if you can't identify this problem in your thinking, right? You are not going to be remembered. And if you are, it's not for what you hope you're going to be remembered for. You're going to be remembered for someone who weren't able to step into this kind of paradox and identify it and see, there's something wrong in my basic thinking here, right? You won't be remembered for anything you want to be remembered for if you don't address this. Let me just put it that straight, right?
Now, you are unable to ever overcome gravity. You are unable to gesture and have something fly across through telekinesis. You are unable to directly read the minds of other people. So these are absolutely consistent and universal experiences within humanity. So
there's not an experience that is universal. Just because you haven't experienced it differently in the past and it's still the same, doesn't mean that it must follow that it's the same in the future, right? If your wife had always bought tomatoes and put them in the drawer in your fridge, and every Friday you are used to that. There are, tomatoes in the fridge every Friday. It doesn't mean there will be tomatoes in your fridge from now on until the end of time or whatever, right? There might be, but you have to be there in the present in order to justify having knowledge of it, right? That's the limitation of knowledge. You can only have knowledge in the now, right? If you need to go into epistemology. But that's the limitations of knowledge. And that's what you settle in metaphysics, so that you don't go overboard in your epistemology, right? The connection between metaphysics and epistemology is metaphysics says this is how far you can go with knowledge. The rest, leave it alone. It can't be knowledge. Something like that, right?
We have to first differentiate between things which we can make up, things which we can control within our own mind. If you are thinking about something obsessively, you can, like if you have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, you can get therapy and you can control those thoughts. And so there's things that you can control within yourself. You can control your mood. You can think of things that are exciting. You can even accelerate your heart rate. You can meditate and you can decelerate your heart rate. So there's things that you can control within yourself, directly or indirectly. You can even control the movement of your hands. I'm gesturing, even though I'm just doing audio, because it helps me to think and communicate. So there's things that you can control within yourself, and that's one category.
You can control your reasoning about something. You can control whether or not you want to think of an ice cream or something like that. You can will yourself to think of ice cream, but you can will yourself to experience ice cream just like that. You can maybe change your position in reality, as you call it, in order to raise the likelihood that you're going to experience ice cream. But that doesn't, just because you think that you're going to experience ice cream in 10 minutes, that doesn't mean you must be experiencing ice cream in 10 minutes. You will know in 10 minutes whether or not there's ice cream or not, right? Well, you will know ice cream if there's ice cream in 10 minutes when you predict there will be ice cream. But you have to be there in 10 minutes to justify knowledge of that ice cream, right? So it's he's stepping into the deep end here, right? Where he really sort of, it's not only bad philosophy or bad metaphysics, but he's talking about all sorts of things that is not necessarily metaphysics. It's somewhere else in philosophy, right? So it's confusing as hell, right? You can't make a philosophical discourse on this plateau, in this format, where things are thrown left and right like this, right? And I'm trying to get back to this foundation, and he keeps going somewhere else, right? And if I'm not saying what he wants to hear, then he goes in and says, this is what it is, right? So he's not listening in any sense of the word, right? He's just using this as a stepstone to tell me what he thinks, while calling it a discussion, possibly, right?
And then there are other things that you can't control within yourself, right? You could have, you can't control whether you digest or not. Usually you eat food, it's an automatic. You can't control whether you produce gas or not, except by not eating. And you can't control the contents of your nightly dreams, right? So these are things that happen within yourself that you can't control. Now, there's this whole other area.
But he is referring implicitly to knowledge now, right? He's talking about stomach, he's talking about food, and that's what you do when you get to understanding knowledge, right? And, objectifications, cognitive things, and sort of, you have to establish this before you can talk about these objects, right? He doesn't understand. He's doing epistemology now, that, and actually beyond this epistemology, he is talking as if it's been settled what knowledge is, right? So he's not in metaphysics anymore, right? He's somewhere else. And that's what annoying. And then I try to, no, let's get back to metaphysics, because that was my starting question, right? I mean, how can anybody in his surroundings have any kind of normal discussion with him about these things? You can't. It's impossible. He's an idiot. He doesn't understand what he's doing, right? And he has this sort of power mania where he has to be on control of everything and, be the authority, right? That even inhibits it further, his ability to have a decent discussion with people, right? Maybe that's why he's sitting there alone and nobody wants to talk to him, because they don't want to be treated like idiots, right?
I think you called it sequelae or sense data.
No, I called it qualia. That's a standard term used in academic philosophy. You might have, a sense data is not necessarily a qualia. A sense data is what you think you're referring to before it becomes a qualia, right? But what you are actually pointing to is the hard problem of consciousness, because you don't have sense data, right? You don't have it before it became an experience. And when it comes the experiential version of it, it's no longer that which was before the experience. Then it's what the representation of it is after the experience, right? After it has entered through the screen of experience. What came before you can never get to, because you don't have that, right?
Which you can't control. I can't, in a story, I can say it was stormy and then suddenly it was a clear blue sky.
A clear blue sky and stormy, those are interpretations of qualia, right? Or experiences or perceptions, whatever term you want to put on it. But those are the things we need to settle how we understand it before you talk about weather or while you talk about blue sky, because that's an abstraction or a cognition or something conceptual or something along those lines that you need to deal with in epistemology, or maybe even in metaphysics, what you mean by it before you define what knowledge is among these things, right? So there might be fluffy lines between when we're dealing with metaphysics and epistemology, but my question was sort of basic metaphysics, right? And that should not entail any kind of reference to knowledge, right? When you're getting to the end of metaphysics and approaching the start of epistemology, there might be a gray area where you're starting to talk about something that sounds like knowledge, but still is kind of metaphysics when you sort of go into defining, okay, this must be a definition of knowledge of some kind, right? But this is all over the place, right? He's just, grabbing something and arguing and thinking he's creating something. It's disconnected. There's no coherence in it, right? You can't trust disconnected philosophy. Please, when people argue, you have to be able to go back to that reduction base, which I would say is the qualia, the sounds, the taste, the colors, and so on, right? That's what you have to connect back to. If you can't connect back to that from whatever philosophy is being done over here, you should reject that philosophy until further that is over here, because you can't connect it with that base, the foundation over there, which was the starting point. Then you should conclude that it might be erroneous, because you can't connect it to the ground, right? So that's why it needs to be stepwise, and then the next step, and so on, until you start to do epistemology. And that has to be stepwise, and so on, until you get to ethics, and stepwise, and then you have a moral principle, right? And that moral principle has to be traceable all the way back through ethics, back through epistemology, back through metaphysics, until you reach that ground floor, which is also called a reduction base. That's that's good philosophy, right? This is just, farting in the wind, basically, right? I'm not saying it's completely wrong or anything like that, but it's both disconnected and sort of polemic, or whatever you want to say, right? He's not trying to make it very stringent and concise and precise. And so we start with this starting point. Okay, let's see if we can get to the next point. What would it entail, or how could we get to the next point? Well, we should be able to point back to the previous one, and so on, and then start that kind of structure, right? That would be a start of a good philosophical discourse when you're doing metaphysics. But no. He's just, this kind of show, right? I have absolutely no respect for this at all, right? At all. It's so bad, right? It's absolutely disgusting, right? Okay, I think I'll take a break. It's 1.5 hour into it, and I've done 14 minutes. That's a new record for Minecraft. I'm actually thinking that using this as a stepstone to actually argue for what I was maybe naively hoping that we might get to. I'm get to doing it this way then, by reflecting and deconstructing what he's saying and what I'm saying and trying to put it into a bigger perspective, right? This is actually a way to do this, that where both, my philosophy comes across and my criticism of his philosophy can come across, while I'm actually referring to some discourse we had, or, it's an insult to discourse to call this a discourse, right? But you know what I mean, right? Okay. See you in the next one.
Right. That would be a sort of